"You're being evicted," my brother sneered. "This land was never truly yours anyway." I remained calm, simply nodding. He had no idea I'd already secured the entire property under a trust. Watching him pack up his life was the sweetest revenge. I'm Laura, 38, and I grew up in a tiny town most folks would never notice on a map unless they had a specific reason to be there. Our family's roots ran deep in that place, primarily because of the land my dad owned. He had several dozen acres of rolling hills, some woods, and a humble farmhouse my grandfather built. It was never lavish, but it felt like ours, or so I believed. This isn't just a story about property or money. It's about family betrayal and the slow-burning bitterness that can tear loved ones apart. I never imagined my brother Mark would become the villain he did, but I suppose the more entitled someone feels, the easier it is for them to justify anything they desire. Dad passed away 5 years ago. We all expected the land to be divided equally between Mark and me, his only children. Dad never fussed much about his will. He trusted us to treat each other fairly. Unfortunately, Mark saw things differently. He didn't just want his portion, he wanted the whole estate. After Dad died, Mark began showing up at the property almost every weekend, acting as if he already owned it outright. He cleared sections of the woods without consulting me, telling neighbors he was managing the land for both of us, yet only inviting them to side with him. His message was unmistakably clear: the land was his. I live about 3 hours away, working in the city. I visited the property perhaps twice a year, mostly to maintain a connection to my origins. Each visit revealed signs of Mark's presence, a truck or two by the barn, or a fence rebuilt without explanation. The worst was discovering from a neighbor that Mark had been placing for sale signs along the property's edges, behaving as if he were the sole owner with every right to sell parts of it without my knowledge. When I questioned him, Mark dismissed me with a sneer. "This land was never truly yours, Laura. You just inherited some papers and a dream. I'm the one who's been here, working, managing it. You've been chasing a city life while I kept this place together." That stung, but I kept my composure. I wasn't about to let him intimidate me or rewrite our family's history. Besides, I possessed something he didn't: patience and a strategy. I began delving into property records, quietly meeting with lawyers. I knew I needed an legal position, something absolutely ironclad. It took months of sifting through old documents, consulting real estate agents, and investing my savings. But eventually, I acquired the entire property, all of it, under a trust in my name. The trust was crucial. Mark couldn't touch it. He was so preoccupied with acting like the owner that he never once thought to verify if the paperwork aligned with his arrogance. It wasn't solely about the land. Mark's sense of entitlement bled into every aspect of our lives. Our parents, especially Mum, were caught in the middle. They always tried to maintain peace, but mostly they sided with Mark because he was loud, demanding, and skilled at making them feel guilty. Mark behaved as though he were the family's favorite, the one who stayed close, took responsibility, and therefore deserved more. Me, I was the absent daughter, the one who left town and didn't do enough. According to him, and, sadly, Mum, my success in the city meant I was selfish and ungrateful. At every family gathering, Mark would find a way to remind me of what I supposedly owed to our family and the property. If I tried to assert myself, he'd make me feel like the antagonist. "You don't understand what it takes to keep this place alive," he'd declare, looking down his nose at me. "You never did." Last year, things escalated significantly. Mark blocked access points to the property, changed the locks on the barn, and even threatened neighbors who attempted to let me in. When I confronted him during a visit, he flat out told me, "You don't have permission to be here anymore." The neighbors, many of whom I'd known since childhood, began keeping their distance. Some feared Mark's temper or his influence in town. Others simply didn't want to get involved. One neighbor, Mr. Hughes, a family friend for decades, quietly pulled me aside. "Laura, Mark's changing. It's not just the land anymore. He's trying to completely push you out. Be careful." That was the first genuine warning, but I remained optimistic that I could resolve things without a full-blown battle. Then came the eviction notice. Seemingly out of nowhere, Mark sent me a formal legal document demanding I vacate the property immediately. It was drafted as if I were a trespasser, not a co-owner. The letter stated he was exercising full control and ownership rights, and that I had no legal claim to the land or any structures on it. I nearly chuckled when I received it. I knew the truth. I knew what I'd orchestrated behind the scenes. But I didn't respond with anger. Instead, I calmly replied with a letter of my own. attaching the trust documents and a detailed explanation that the property was now legally mine, all of it. Mark had been living on borrowed ground, and his eviction notice only made him appear desperate. A week ago, I returned to the property one last time to face Mark in person. I wanted to see his expression when he realized the tables had turned. He was lounging on the porch, looking like he owned the world. His smirk was wider than ever. "You're being evicted, Laura," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "This land was never yours anyway. You should have stayed in your fancy city and left the real work to me." I didn't react. I took a deep breath and said, "You might want to sit down." That's when I handed him the trust paperwork. His grin faltered, his eyes scanning the documents with growing disbelief. "This can't be real," he mumbled. "It's very real," I replied. "You're living here as a tenant on land I own." The ensuing silence was heavy. Then came the slow collapse. Mark's confident posture crumbled as he realized his options were gone. Over the next few days, I watched him pack his belongings, one box at a time. His friends stopped visiting, and the neighbors who once avoided me now greeted me with nods and small smiles. It was clear I had won this round. The very next day, the atmosphere around the property shifted dramatically. It wasn't just that Mark was gone, or mostly gone, it was how the neighbors began to react. People who had been friendly before turned their backs, some crossed the street rather than saying hello. It felt like a sudden chill had settled over the place. I didn't understand it at first. I'd done everything correctly, legally and morally. I had the documents, I had the truth, so why did I feel like the outsider now? I found the answer during a quick trip into town a few days later. I stopped by the local diner, the same one, where my family and I used to eat on Sundays. The place was quieter than usual, and as I walked in I overheard a conversation at the counter. The regulars were whispering about me. "Mark's got it all figured out," said a man I recognized as the local hardware store owner. "Laura's just city folk pretending she belongs here." The woman next to him nodded. "You don't just take land like that. Mark's the one who's been here doing the hard work. She's an outsider." I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. Let them think what they wanted. But the words hit me hard. Mark had spent months implanting these ideas in the town that I was a stranger, a fraud, someone trying to steal what was his by right. I realized then how carefully Mark had manipulated the narrative. He wasn't just angry about the land. He was furious that his power was slipping away, and he was determined to drag everyone down with him. Back at the property, things worsened. I'd been spending more time there, mending fences, clearing paths, trying to make the place feel like home again. Mark had left behind more than just boxes and old clothes. There were subtle hints that he was still observing minor acts of sabotage that unnerved me. The day I found the fence posts he'd deliberately loosened, nearly collapsing a section of the perimeter, I felt the tension surge. That wasn't an accident. It was a warning. When I confronted him by phone, he merely laughed. "You think this is over, Laura? You're just getting started. You don't own loyalty. You don't own respect. You're in my world now, whether you like it or not." That call shook me, but I didn't let it show. Then came the letter. This one wasn't a casual eviction notice or some vague legal threat. It was from a lawyer I'd never heard of, claiming Mark had filed a dispute, attempting to overturn the trust, challenge the sale, and even accuse me of fraud. I knew Mark's temper, but this was different, cold, calculated, and costly. He was pulling out all the stops to bring me down. I consulted my lawyer, who warned me the legal battle could stretch on for months, perhaps years. The expenses, the stress, the endless back and forth, that was precisely what Mark wanted, to wear me down until I surrendered. The real turning point, however, occurred during a town hall meeting. I decided to attend, wanting to hear the community's perspective, to challenge the whispers, and perhaps find some allies. I was prepared to explain everything, to be open and honest. But what I encountered was a room full of people who had already chosen sides. Mark was there too, standing front and center, exuding confidence. He delivered a speech that was pure manipulation. He spoke of tradition, loyalty, family values, and how he was the one who preserved the legacy while I chased my own ambitions elsewhere. He talked about community, portraying me as a stranger who cared nothing for the people or the land. When I tried to speak afterward, people shut me down. I was interrupted, talked over, and in the end, the room sided with Mark. I left feeling more isolated than ever. From that moment on, Mark's campaign against me became relentless. Anonymous flyers circulated around town, accusing me of shady deals and betraying the family. Social media posts emerged, filled with half-truths and outright lies about me. The local paper even published a story questioning my legitimacy as a landowner, quoting unnamed concerned citizens. It was like watching a slow-motion character assassination. And Mark wasn't just fighting in public. I began noticing more direct attacks. One morning I arrived at the property to find the front gate damaged, chains cut, the lock smashed. The barn door had been pried open, and some of my tools and supplies were missing. Nothing valuable, but the message was clear. I wasn't welcome. I reported it to the sheriff, but without proof of who was responsible, there wasn't much they could do. I maintained a closer watch after that, installing cameras and alarms, but Mark was cunning. He never came himself. Instead, it was friends or people who owed him favors, shadows that vanished before I could catch them. Still, I persisted. I poured time and money into the land, repairing what Mark and his cronies had damaged. I planted flowers near the farmhouse, cleaned up the driveway, and tried to restore life to a place that had been poisoned by years of resentment. But every time I felt like I was making progress, Mark found a way to drag me back down. Then, just last week, things took a darker turn. I received a call from a close family friend, someone who had remained neutral throughout most of this ordeal. He sounded shaken. "Laura, you need to be careful. Mark's been talking to some people, dangerous people. He's not just going to sit back and lose. He's planning something big." I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know, but his warning lingered. That night I heard it, the engine of a truck revving outside, too late for any neighborly visit. I looked through the window just in time to see two figures unloading large containers from the back. I didn't know what they were carrying, but the look in their eyes told me it wasn't anything good. I called the sheriff immediately, but, again, without clear evidence, they could only promise to keep an eye out. Mark's shadow was creeping back onto the land, and I knew the conflict wasn't just about property anymore. It was about control, about breaking me, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on before the whole situation spiraled out of control. After that night, I knew things were about to worsen. The truck, the men unloading those mysterious containers, it was the first indication that Mark wasn't just trying to force me out with words and legal tactics anymore. He was escalating. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt genuinely terrified. I started sleeping with one eye open, literally. My phone was always beside me, the security cameras on full alert. Every time I heard a car outside, or footsteps near the house, my heart pounded. Despite the fear, I refused to back down. This was my home now, my life, and I wasn't going to let some bitter, greedy sibling ruin it. The next day, I decided to patrol the property, inspecting every fence post, every gate, every inch of the perimeter. The destruction was more than just physical, it felt like a deliberate message. The barn where I stored my tools and a few sentimental items from my parents was particularly damaged. The wood was splintered near the hinges, and I found marks on the ground where someone had tried to force their way inside again. I collected pieces of broken wood, trying to figure out when it had happened, but no one had seen anything. Then came the renewed shift among the neighbors. They continued to avoid me more and more. The few conversations I did have were tense, abrupt. I heard whispers about family loyalty and outsiders, and even some explicit warnings to stay away. I never imagined the people I'd grown up with would turn on me like this, but Mark had worked his network effectively. He was playing the long game, and slowly, it was paying off. One afternoon, a knock at the door startled me. It was Sarah, my closest childhood friend. She'd been distant lately, caught in the middle of this mess. She looked exhausted, and I could see the hesitation in her eyes before she finally spoke. "Laura, I don't want to be involved, but I have to tell you, Mark's been meeting with some very influential people and townfolks who hold a lot of sway. He's promising them things, money, favors, control of land once you're out, and some of them are not exactly the kind of people you want on your side." Her words hit me like a punch. This wasn't just about family anymore. Mark was pulling strings I couldn't even perceive, and the town was subtly shifting under his influence. That evening, I sat on the porch, trying to absorb everything. I ran my fingers over the framed photo of my parents on the windowsill inside, their smiling faces frozen in time. I'd never wanted to fight like this. I'd dreamed of peaceful weekends here, growing plants, maybe even starting a small farm, but all of that was slipping through my fingers. And then came the worst part. The threats started arriving. At first there were subtle notes slipped under the door, warning me to leave before it's too late. Anonymous calls in the dead of night with silence on the other end. Signs in my yard, spray-painted messages on the driveway telling me to get out. I documented every note, every call, everything, but it was the creeping dread that was hardest to bear. The thought that Mark's vendetta was now invading the very ground I stood on. One particularly cold morning, I found my mailbox smashed to bits. Among the wreckage was a folded letter. The handwriting was sharp and jagged, like someone had angrily jabbed the pen. It simply read, "You don't belong here. This land was never yours." The message echoed Mark's cruel words from the first day I confronted him, but now it wasn't just talk, it was a physical warning. That week, I hired a private security consultant, someone who specialized in these types of disputes and knew how to ensure safety when the law wasn't enough. He was professional, no nonsense, and as soon as he stepped onto the property, he confirmed the truth I'd been trying to ignore. "Laura, this isn't just sibling rivalry. This is a full-blown campaign of intimidation. You're dealing with someone who's willing to cross lines most people won't." Hearing it articulated made it real. Mark wasn't just angry or entitled, he was dangerous. Meanwhile, the legal battle dragged on. Every motion Mark filed felt like a gut punch. More accusations, more delays, more expensive court dates. My lawyer tried to keep me focused, but even they admitted this would test my patience and finances like nothing before. During one court session, Mark's lawyer presented what they claimed was new evidence. A handwritten note from my late father, supposedly granting Mark full rights to the land. It was quickly proven a forgery, but the damage was done. The judge ordered a temporary injunction, halting any work on the property until the next hearing. Suddenly, my hard-won progress was stalled. Mark was relentless. At a local fundraiser a few days later, I overheard him whispering to a group of investors, portraying me as a reckless city girl who didn't understand the land or its legacy. I watched as people I thought were friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. That night, I sat alone in the darkened farmhouse, the silence pressing down. Then came the breaking point. I awoke to the sound of sirens. Flashing red and blue lights flooded the windows. The sheriff's department had arrived, responding to an anonymous tip about illegal activities on my property. It took hours to convince them that everything was legitimate, that no laws were being broken, but the damage to my reputation was immediate. I later discovered Mark had called them himself, fabricating complaints to publicly embarrass me and waste my time. I knew I couldn't keep fighting Mark on his home turf, the town, the courts, the whispers. I needed a new strategy, something he wouldn't anticipate, something that would stop this before it destroyed me. But what that night, I gazed out the window at the dark silhouette of the land I'd fought so hard to own. I reflected on everything Mark had done, the lies, the sabotage, the threats, and I realized this wasn't just about property or money anymore. It was about power, control, pride, and I wasn't going to lose. That's when I began researching trusts and property law late into the night. I uncovered something I hadn't known before, a method to shield the land from people like Mark, to ensure no one could ever touch it. An intricate, airtight trust. It was costly and time-consuming, but it was the only way to completely take the fight out of Mark's hand. So, over the next several weeks, I collaborated with a lawyer to establish a trust that would place the property beyond dispute, beyond attacks, beyond Mark's reach. It meant relinquishing some personal control, entrusting the land to a neutral party, but it was the safest move. And when the trust was finalized, I held the papers, feeling a mix of relief and triumph. But of course, Mark wasn't going to accept it quietly. The day I served him the final notice, that the land was now under the trust and he had no legal claim whatsoever, was the day the game truly changed. His smirk was the same one he always wore, the look of someone who believed he was untouchable. "You think this ends it? You don't get to hide behind lawyers and papers. This land was ours, and you stole it." I nodded calmly, clutching the papers tightly. He didn't know the full truth, because the trust wasn't merely a legal shield. It was the first move in my counterattack. I had purchased the entire property, every inch under that trust, months before the conflict even began, ensuring Mark couldn't touch a single thing. And as I watched him pack his last few belongings, I felt the sweetest kind of satisfaction. Mark's empire was crumbling. After Mark realized the trust had definitively sealed his eviction, I saw a flicker of something beneath that smug facade: panic, disbelief, and an undeniable surge of anger he struggled to conceal. But that was merely the beginning. Mark didn't just walk away quietly. He exploded like a powder keg. Within days, I started hearing whispers from the neighbors. Mark was spreading vicious falsehoods about me, claiming I was manipulating the law, cheating my own family out of what was rightfully theirs. He portrayed me as the villain in every conversation, twisting the story to fit his narrative. What stung the most wasn't just his lies. but that some people in town, people I had known my entire life, began to believe him. One afternoon, as I was completing some repairs on the porch, Sarah pulled me aside, her face pale. "Laura, you need to be careful. Mark's not stopping with just words. I overheard him telling a few influential people here that you're planning to sell the property to some major corporation. He's trying to turn the community against you." I gazed out toward the fields, the land my parents had worked so hard for, and felt a wave of helplessness. If Mark succeeded in alienating the town, I'd be completely isolated. Then came the silent war on my property. It began subtly, tools missing from the shed, tires slashed, signs vandalized. At first I considered it kids or pranksters, but soon it became evident this was Mark's doing, or at least his supporters. One morning, I awoke to find the driveway gate altered shut, padlocked tight. I had to call a locksmith just to get inside. Each incident chipped away at my peace of mind and drained my energy. Despite the harassment, I remained composed. I kept a journal of every incident, every threat, every suspicious person lurking around the property. I installed additional cameras, motion sensors, and security lights. Mark's attempts to break me only solidified my resolve, but Mark wasn't content with mere harassment. About a month after the trust was finalized, I received a formal notice from the town's zoning board. Someone had filed a complaint claiming I was operating an unauthorized business on the property and violating multiple codes. One immediately knew who was behind it. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. The night before the hearing, I stayed up late preparing. I meticulously reviewed property records, business licenses, and every single regulation that could possibly be relevant. I had a detailed, airtight defense ready. When I walked into the hearing room, I was prepared for Mark's legal team, and sure enough, they were there, sitting smugly in the back with their usual sneers. During the hearing, Mark's lawyer attempted to argue that the property was not being used residentially but was instead an illegal commercial operation, citing witnesses who claimed to have seen frequent deliveries and unusual activity. I calmly presented my case, displaying permits, licenses, and testimony from neighbors who supported me. The hearing officer was thorough and fair, and by the end, it was clear the complaint was baseless. Mark's case was dismissed, but the damage was done. After the hearing, Mark cornered me outside the building. His eyes were cold and hard. "This isn't over, Laura," he said quietly, but with a venom that made me shiver. "You've only bought time. I'll find a way to break you." I smiled, my voice steady. "Maybe, but every move you make just digs your own grave deeper." Over the next few weeks, I started noticing strange activity inside the house, minor things at first, like misplaced items or doors left open. Someone was sneaking inside, no doubt. One morning I found my laptop smashed on the kitchen floor, the screen cracked beyond repair. The only thing missing was a folder labeled Family Documents. Realizing Mark was attempting to uncover damaging information about me, I immediately backed up every file, changed all my passwords, and installed enhanced security inside the house. I also hired a private investigator. The PI returned with startling news. Mark had been digging into every aspect of my life, trying to find any vulnerability he could exploit. But what truly shocked me was that Mark had been communicating with my distant cousins, the ones I barely knew. He'd convinced some of them to side with him, promising a share of the land if he succeeded in forcing me out. The family, the ones I thought were distant but neutral, were proving to be just as toxic and greedy as Mark. It was like a spiderweb, each thread tangled with lies, manipulation, and betrayal. That realization hurt in a way nothing else had. Family was supposed to be the one place I could trust. I knew then I had to outsmart not just Mark, but all of them, so I strategized my next move. Using the trust as a shield, I quietly negotiated with some key figures and town people Mark was trying to bribe and manipulate. I offered them fair deals, partnerships, and a stake in the land's future. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Some of Mark's allies started backing away. The rumors began to subside, but Mark noticed. His calls to me became more aggressive, his tone laced with menace. One night he appeared at the property with a group of men friends of his who looked accustomed to getting their way. They didn't say much, just stood there, blocking the driveway, staring me down. I called the police immediately. This time, the sheriff's department arrived quickly and made it clear to Mark and his crew that any trespassing would lead to arrests. Mark sneered but retreated for now. Despite these small victories, I knew this wasn't the end. Mark's venom was pervasive, and he wasn't finished trying to destroy me. That's when I decided to take a step that astonished everyone. I invited Mark to the property for a meeting, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to see his face. When he realized I was in control, he arrived late, as smug as ever. I met him at the gate.com and composed. "Mark," I said, "it's time we talked." His smirk widened. "I've been waiting for this." Inside, I laid out everything I knew about his schemes, his lies, and his betrayals. I didn't hold back. And when I finished, I watched his confident facade crack, but Mark was quick to recover. "You think this will stop me? You're dreaming." I smiled quietly. "No, Mark, this is just the beginning." The moment I'd been anticipating had come. I had evidence of his illegal dealings, his bribery attempts, and the threats he'd made, not just against me, but against neighbors and officials, and I was ready to make it public. But right then, Mark leaned forward and whispered, "You don't know what you're dealing with, Laura." I didn't flinch. I met his eyes evenly. "Oh, I do," I said. "I know exactly who you are, what you've done, and what you'll never get away with." The next morning I handed everything over to my lawyer, copies of emails, recorded threats, proof of bribery attempts, and documents demonstrating how Mark had been working behind the scenes to sabotage me. We also compiled evidence of the trespassing and vandalism. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a criminal case. Within a week, Mark was served with multiple cease and desist orders. The police began investigating the harassment and illegal dealings. His so-called allies quickly distanced themselves, unwilling to get entangled in a legal mess. Meanwhile, I went public. I posted a detailed account of everything on social media and local community forums, with facts and proof, making it impossible for Mark's lies to stand. The town shifted. Support poured in from neighbors, old friends, and even some of the cousins Mark had attempted to buy off. Mark's reaction was predictable: anger, denial, more threats. But this time, the sheriff's department wasn't just warning him, they were prepared to act. One afternoon they arrived at his house and arrested him on charges of harassment, trespassing, and attempted bribery. The trial was a spectacle. Mark's reputation, already crumbling, took the final hit when the court revealed the full extent of his schemes. The judge handed down a sentence that included probation, community service, and hefty fines. His lawyer tried to spin things, but the mountain of evidence was undeniable. As for the rest of the family, the cousins who sided with Mark quickly found themselves alienated. Their alliances with him destroyed whatever goodwill they had left. No one wanted to be associated with the toxic drama or the legal fallout. The ones who remained neutral or supported me were quietly rewarded with small partnerships, and the property's future development a testament to my commitment to rebuild, not just for myself, but for the entire community. Mark was left alone, his threats empty, his power gone. The house he once dominated now stood quiet, his belongings packed and removed. The land, under my name and the trust, was no longer a battleground but a fresh start. For me, this wasn't just revenge. It was reclaiming what was rightfully mine and proving that no matter how dark family ties can become, you can break free. I don't forgive Mark or the others. Their greed and cruelty left scars that won't fade, and I ensure the property remains protected from anyone who thinks they can seize it by force or manipulation. Now, when I walk those fields, I don't see the fights or the betrayals. I see resilience, strength, and a future I built from the ashes they tried to burn me in. So, yes, Mark smirked and told me this land was never yours anyway. But I calmly nodded because I knew the truth. It was always mine. I just had to be the one clever enough to claim it. And watching him pack up and leave was, without a doubt, the sweetest payback I ever received. If you're ever caught in a family dispute like this, remember, keep your wits about you, gather your evidence, and don't back down. The people who truly matter will stand with you. The ones who don't, they're not worth it.